Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the presentation, Discovery of Reality. And this is specifically today the topic, Tools to Describe Reality. Now, our speaker, Mr. Gilbert Hakim, is a philanthropist who is dedicated to the promotion of an ever-advancing civilization. From his work with educational institutions and health clinics, to date, Mr. Hakim has shown his commitment to service to the entire human race. Mr. Hakim abides by the principle that humanity shares one identity, one common creator, and one common destiny. A brief highlight of what is going to be spoken about in the flyer that we had handed out or had sent out via email or published online, you'll find that there are three major subjects: primal cause, or the primal will, primal attraction, and efficient cause. He is going to utilize mathematics and logic, the theory of minimalism, the creation of an objective universal language, binary code, binary language, computers and artificial intelligence, or AI, and again back onto efficient cause, and the role of revelation or efficient cause in ethics development. So with that said, please, let's give a beautiful welcome for Mr. Gilbert Hakim, our speaker.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to start with basically tools that we need to have to describe reality. And this language has to be what's called objective language. It means that every word has the same meaning for everyone that is listening to it. Now, first, we need to define what is objective and what is subjective language. Give you an example. We have a bunch of people listening to this talk in a room, and we set the temperature of the room at 75 degrees. So now everybody knows it's 75 degrees. The gentleman from Alaska comes in and says, well, this place is too hot. The Jamaican guy comes in and says, yeah, man, this is cold. I can't live here. So you see that perspective of the cold or warm is individually subjective, but the temperature of the room is constant. And when you say 75 degrees, everybody understands what the 75 degrees means. So this is the difference between objective and subjective. Now, mathematics and logic is binary. That means either is or it's not. That means it's objective. You can't refute it. When you prove something mathematically, it's objective. So this is the whole process of basically creating a universal language, which is obviously mathematical base or computational base, that everybody, when they use it, they mean exactly the same thing. So for this purpose, we use minimalism, which is a mathematical philosophy presented by Dr. William Hatcher, which we're going to use as well to show how we can get to the truth, or this binary language generally. So we call also efficient cause. It's the most efficient way of getting to a solution or finding an answer or discovering result of a equation. So this is called efficient cause. That means, as Muhammad says, that truth is one, foolish people made it many. So truth is always one. So, and then we look at the role of revelation, and in Christian terms, they call it the Holy Spirit, which is the writings of the manifestations of God, or creator for this matter, and relationship to efficient cause that creates the ethics that we know today. So I'm going to go to describe this history of mathematics, and we want to concentrate on Descartes, Gödel, and Heisenberg, which invented basically quantum mechanics. So if we go to the timeline of history of mathematics, then we see these are pictures of let me adjust this, of different mathematicians that and philosophers that created the basis for what we know today. And when you're looking at, for example, Descartes, which came up with Cartesian theory, which is one of the most important discovery in the 16th century, related to ability to look at physical reality. So his theorem was that any phenomenon in physical reality has a physical source. So there is no invisible deity hand arranging or rearranging physical reality for humanity. So this really was the basis of revolution of the sciences and healthcare, physical discoveries, automation, and so on and so forth. So if you look closely, when we come to 1930s, Gödel, which is the Australian mathematician, discovered that the theorem of incompleteness, this state that any consistent and sufficiently powerful mathematical system contains certain statements that are true but cannot be proven. In other words, mathematics contains certain problems that are impossible to solve. They exist, but it's impossible to solve. This result had a profound impact on the development and philosophy of mathematics. And this is called the impossible theorem. So, and Heisenberg basically used this theorem and created quantum mechanics, where basically in the atomic level, he described that quantums have two characteristics. One is wave, and one is actually quantum of energy. So they have a duality. And this really created the whole revolution from 1930s onward. That proved that we cannot define all realities with proven all realities through visible elements in the universe. It's not possible to do that, but we can find them. That was the key element, which was very important from that perspective. So let's look at, okay, so now we are basically looking at history of invention. We go from a punch card to chip technology, to floppy disks, to microprocessors, to internet, to, as you see, as computational needs and power increased, we devised different tools to describe reality, automation, and artificial intelligence. So you see that all these things happened less than maybe 100 years. So this is really very important to look at this. We'll look at it later on. So clearly, advent of mathematics and logic caused this explosion of discoveries, both scientifically and the ability of humanity to offload the menial, strenuous, repetitive, dangerous elements to computers and robotics. And this allowed us to free ourselves to be able to exponentially increase the sciences and achieving explanation for physical reality. So this is very important from that perspective, that exponentially we, by devising this tool, we could get to truth and reality as fast as we are doing currently. Now, for this, we needed to invent obviously computational language using mathematics to describe the reality for these machines to be able to give us the answer faster and faster and faster. So but one thing which was very important, these languages are actually objective. That means that the instruction set, the variables that is being used, is common to every user of that language. They don't have different meanings to different people. So this is really where the objective language of computation was invented, which is constitute of zeros and ones, that we can now simulate terabytes of data, massage it in matter of seconds. Now, these languages is interesting. Starting from 1951, by the way, I used I may give up my age because I used Fortran, which was invented in 1957, or BASIC, that was in 1964. And so on. So you see the COBOL, for example. As you see, as time went by, humanity had to, scientists had to develop new languages specifically to describe a portion of reality. But the interesting part about these languages were that all objective, that they describe exactly the functions, and whoever is using this language to communicate have the same understanding of those operators and operands. So as you go on, you see most people can recognize some of these, like D-base 3 was invented in 1984, for example. These are quite interesting. As we go on, Visual Basic. We have even, it's interesting, look at the C# was invented in 2001. So when you look closely, we see that we are capable of defining objective language. But now you're scratching your head and say, what does computer language have anything to do with material and spiritual civilization? If you look closely, these languages, these objective languages describe realities during the timeline of humanity inventing faster and faster machines, inventing robotics, inventing many different methodology to facilitate and improve productivity of people. Now, if you look closely, you see many of those languages are still in use today, although they describe reality of the timeline that they were invented in, which is very interesting. And why is it then, when a new, better language appears humanity doesn't adapt it and everybody switches to it. And the reason is very interesting. It's socioeconomic system and human nature is the cause of it. Because humanity doesn't like change, and they like their old practices and their habits. Although the newer technology is a lot more efficient. So this is really, when you look at these aspects, you see exactly the same thing is happening with subjective language that derived from ecclesiastical systems that propose the objective language of Holy Spirit. So what humanity did in the ecclesiastical system, application of those Holy Spirit or revelation were implemented through ecclesiastical system. So they created habits for people to follow, and suddenly different branches of religion started to appear, because the original interpretation of the ecclesiastical system didn't satisfy the needs of the humanity and the problems that they were facing. So they created an earthly version of the Holy Spirit for people to understand and follow. And the minute this revelation occurred, it started to branch out to many, many different sects. Again, through successive revelation, creators send these sages with new instruction set that not only covered the old ones, it improved the productivity and morality and ethics of the society, and application of those scientific discoveries in the material realm. So as you see that you see many different religions and sects still exist, and what they do, they try to adapt and retrofit the new revelation and still keep their own identity and call themselves Christian or Muslim or Buddhist. But in reality, what they practice is getting use of the new revelation that came to supplement their beliefs, because with their belief they cannot survive. Now you see implication of the socioeconomic system, human nature that doesn't like change, and habits and old practices. So you see the correlation of the computer or computing language, which is purely objective, with the revelation, which is objective in source, but its application of it through ecclesiastical system becomes subjective. So this is really very interesting correlation. Now we look at the utilization of mathematics and logic to describe whole reality. First, we need to define minimalism. And this is really the latest discovery in terms of ability to define reality in an objective form. So what are the premises of minimalism? One, it says that a significant non-trivial portion of human knowledge can be objectified. That means we can find a solution. The second one is the whole human knowledge cannot be objectified. And this is what GÖDEL was talking about. So total objectification, which Descartes was promoting, is not viable. The third one says everything which can be objectified should be objectified. So all those priest and ecclesiastical structures that were preventing from people learning about Bible, that say, no, this is jurisdiction of the priest and you shouldn't learn it. Obviously, they were in error. So everything which can be objectified should be objectified. Now, another important thing is that the boundary between objectifiable and non-objectifiable cannot itself be objectified. That means that we continuously invent, discover new realities, so this boundary doesn't move all the time. So we barely know a small portion of reality. So this boundary is going to move, and it shouldn't be fixed. The fifth one is valid human knowledge, which resists objectification, is not irrational, but transrational. That means it exists, but we cannot prove it. Sixth, it says objectification is primarily a means of obtaining the truth, clarity. It's not a process within itself. It's not useful within itself. It's a tool for us to get to truth, reality. Maybe I can stop a little bit here and ask if someone has any questions regarding what we discussed so far.
So a question came where the subject of the objectivity or the relativity of the description of reality. Like you mentioned how when we view things as cold as humans, we see it differently. Some person may think it's cold, the same temperature, another may think it's hot. However, in respect to how computers describe reality, it's something that is objective. Could you elaborate a little bit on that point of the difference between the relativity of feelings and emotions and the description of what is?
Sure. First of all, human brain is a subjective device. It's not an objective device. That's why we invented mathematics, to be precise, objective. So when I say I feel pain, the pain has completely different meaning to different people. Now, if you haven't experienced pain, when I talk about pain, you don't know what I'm talking about if you haven't experienced it. So the reality is that you describe pain in terms of interaction of foreign objects or internal pinching your nervous system that sends signal to your brain that says, I'm in trouble. So you see that the model of society, generally, when we communicate with each other, we use a subjective language called English or Arabic or Farsi. Because when you say, I am happy, it means different things to different people. For example, up to middle of the 18th century, 94% of the population of the earth were below, they were in extreme poverty. That means that they were making less than $2 a day. What does that mean? That means that majority of the power, intellectual power of the whole humanity was consumed to feed themselves, and they still couldn't make it. So now you see that for us to define objectivity, we need to use mathematical tools and mathematical language, which has the same meaning to everyone. Meaning of love, what does it mean? An impression of humanity of the objective language of revelation. I'm going to go a little bit down the road and define the objective language of the revelation, do's and don'ts. And we see that if different people have different interpretation of it. But the reality is the source of it is objective. And then we'll discuss this also. I can give you two
There's a
examples.
question. There's a question from Miss Anne Marie. The question is, to clarify, culture is subjective? That's her question.
The impression you have is the messages that through system of basically communication and bunch of Christian reporters portrayed a vision to their liking to masses. The same problem exists if you're in Saudi Arabia. They think that half of the population of American are gay. They think they're all promiscuous and they have no God. They pray to Satan and so on and so forth. Because the impression that we have of somebody else's culture is through sound bites or video bites of few minutes. True impression of the culture cannot be known unless you spend decades studying those cultures. That's what the difference is. So we need to go back to the achievements. And ironically, I have a slide that shows you whoever violates the Holy Spirit, what kind of material livelihood they're going to have. But this is really the impression. When you're looking at, for example, material civilization or sciences, there are two branches. One is physical, which relates to sciences like physics, health, you have medicine, and so on and so forth, mathematics. And then one relates to sociology and basically learning of the behavior of humans, which is continuously changing. Is the impression, sociology is the impression of people and behavior of people, which is continuously changing. And it's subjective, depends on what your beliefs are and how you interpret the action of other people. Okay, very well. I think we should proceed, otherwise we're going to run out of time fairly quickly. So we discussed minimalism and we proved an existence of a creator which was transmaterial. That means it's not in our 3 dimensions and time and has no interaction materially with this reality, whole reality that he created. So there is a creator for whole reality, which is self-caused phenomenon. There is the creator is simple. The creator is unique, universal creator. This cause of created all the existing phenomenon. And he's the only one that created this whole reality. So now the question pops up, where is this fellow? Where is the creator? So then we describe, to prove that, we demonstrate a primal cause. For what purpose this creator created the whole reality? Obviously, what purpose was to be known, is to be perceived. Now, why did he want to be known? And what's the purpose of it? Why should he care? So this is really the law of attraction. So created love for creation. I love thee, therefore I created thee. So this is primal attraction. That's the why. Then he created what's called efficient cause. That means to any phenomenon, problem, there is one efficient solution. And that efficient solution is communicated through manifestation to humanity, which is objective. So the source is objective. Application of the Holy Spirit becomes subjective because it falls into execution of humans to apply it. And of course, every one of us has free will. We can interpret it the way we like it, or we can interpret it the way it originally was meant to. So now to find out where this creator is, we can go back to mathematics. Let's assume that we have a world that is two-dimensional. That means that you see their apartment buildings, their cars, their restaurants, their gyms, and so on and so forth. And these two-dimensional people are basically living in this two-dimensional form. And we're in the third dimension looking at them, and we can see everything they do, the mistake they make, the problems that they face. So what we're gonna do is we need to help these guys. These fellows don't know what they're doing. So what we do is we're gonna go into one of these apartments, pick one of them and pull him out and bring him to our dimension. And we're gonna show him all the mistakes that they're making, give him some instruction how to solve it. And after he saw and he's amazed and he doesn't know what happened to him, we put him back in his apartment to spread the message to all the two-dimensional people. Guess what's gonna happen? Nobody's gonna believe it. Although he's felt it, he's seen it, he knows that it exists, but now he has to propagate it in two-dimensional form. So if you look at the top right corner, when we want to show, if you're in a three-dimensional form today, if you want to show a two-dimensional picture, look at that box on the top right corner. So we demonstrate a three-dimensional cube by showing two squares that are connected through the axis to the point. So someone sitting in the two-dimensional and drawing that cube in the two-dimensional, they can imagine how it would look like in the three-dimension, although they have no way of entering the third dimension. But they can imagine through, of course, mathematics, that such a thing can exist. This was proposed by the way, multidimensional universe by Carl Sagan. He's the astrophysicist of the late 20th century. So now, meantime, we open the communication to this particular individual and start talking to him while he's in the two dimension. So he thinks somebody from his guts is talking to him because he can't see us, he can't detect us, but something is coming to him through visions that he gets, right? So now let's look at where we are. Now we're in the third dimension and we want to know what a cube that had 4 dimensions looked like in 3 dimensions or 2 dimensions. So that's how mathematically we can show there are multiple dimensions, not only these 3 dimensions and time. It can be other dimensions, and tesseract is one of them. So if you take a cube that has 4 dimensions, this is how it's going to look like in 3 dimensions. It's the same cube that has 90-degree angles to 4 different dimensions. If you want to show this tesseract in 2 dimensions, you see the right side, the picture of it in 2 dimensions. Therefore, a person sitting in 2 dimensions in that world can even imagine tesseract too, that there exists a 4th dimension, because he can draw it in his 2-dimensional form. Now we see, how does this creator communicate to us? Because he's in a different dimension, obviously. Through inspiration, ideas, visions, imagination of successive scientists, they can discover reality, but they get it through this imagination, visions, ideas, inspirations. Now, on the revelation side, you see successive sages that creating new ethical movements and discovery of new ethics occurs. Same model, ethical movement is a reflection of vision or application of efficient cause, in Christian term, Holy Spirit, in human society. Application of that Holy Spirit is material phenomenon. That means that humans have to apply it. Therefore, it's subject to the 2nd law of thermodynamics. That means, or entropy. Eventually, those religions would die out. That derived from the efficient cause or Holy Spirit. So movement toward disorder and disintegration is a natural state of the whole reality or physical reality. So it requires renewal. As we know, civilization is expanding. So this, we've seen ever advancing civilization going from humanoid communal living to primitive man, start of civilization, tribal society, to modern man today. So you see that this civilization is defying the 2nd law of thermodynamics, therefore means that someone outside our system, which seems to be the creator, is injecting this energy into the civilization to make it grow continuously. So we want to see correlation of ethical civilization with material civilization. Again, we refer to binary system. Material civilization portion is fixed, which is algebra, calculus, genetics, thermodynamics, etc. Then you have social sciences that is variable, that becomes obsolete, like politics, law, economics, sociology, psychology, and so on. Ethical civilization, or derivative of it, which is religion, talks about 2 separate binary items as well: honesty, charity, uprightness, truthfulness, and so on. The second portion is rites and rituals, which is variable. And again, as social sciences changes, the rites and ritual variable changes, like laws of marriage, holidays, burial, celebrations, prayers, and so on. So you see the correlation of the two, and they're birds of the same, the wings of the same bird. One cannot fly without the other. So now let's see, something happened in the mid-18th century that caused this explosion of the discoveries in reality. We need to see how did this last injection cause this massive increase in velocity of the material civilization and spiritual civilization. So if you look at the chart on the left side, 94% of the living human beings were in extreme poverty. Poverty, not real, poverty alone. 3% of them were in poverty. 94% were extreme poverty in mid-1800s.
Mr.
Now,
Hakim, could you please explain what you mean by poverty in the context of the time?
Yes, if you look closely on the top, this is a picture from 1800 to 2015. Extreme poverty means, by dollars of today, someone making less than $2 a day. That means they can barely feed themselves. If you look at commodity prices, let's pick India. The price of onion is about 50 cents a pound in India today. Why? It's the same price as is in the United States. Why? Because if the price was extremely low in India, they would have shipped it to us. So commodity prices are fluctuate unless it's subsidized, fluctuates very minimally across the world. So when you have to buy 50 cents a pound onion with $2 a day, you're in trouble. Did I answer the question?
Yes, because
No.
of the extremes, because when we see poor people in our societies, it's viewed differently sometimes, because at least in America, we have a lot of social nets that stop people from ending up in the same situation that they may have experienced in the 1800s.
Of course. But the whole key is that we want to see what Holy Spirit or efficient cause was infused into the civilization, whether it was material or spiritual, that caused this jump. Imagine we have 10,000 history of mankind, written history and discoveries, and up to 1800, we were starving to death. So something happened. Now, basic education in the 1800s, only 17% of the people had basic education. Now, you look at literacy, only 12% people could read or write. Democracy, it was non-existent actually in the 1800s. Vaccination, which was the major cause of the improvement in mortality, wasn't even done until mid-1900s. Child mortality, this is very important. 43 out of 100 kids would not make it past 5-year-old. 43% in 1800. So let's look to see what was the source. So now we're going to efficient cause. This is material application of sciences, discovery of real truth, and closed system. So this is basically, let's talk about a physical use of the sciences into a problem that we want to solve for humanity in physical reality. Obviously, we know that the most efficient way of transportation is by plane. So if we're going to go from town A to town B with a plane, obviously we need to develop a model that tells us what altitude to fly, what weather system to avoid, what highway in sky to take, what aviation tower to communicate with, what physical limitation of the plane we have, and to avoid other planes. You see, so we created a complex system using the sciences to solve one of our problems, which is transportation. And guess what? Accidents occur too. But if you use all the instructions in the system, you can avoid mistakes, you can avoid accidents generally. So this is a complex closed system that is using discoveries of sciences and applying it to society. Now let's look at closed phenomena in ethics. I picked a controversial subject, that it's very interesting, where most of us think there are only two positions. One is abortion is individual rights of women, and the other one says abortion is immoral and should be banned. Of course, except for rare special cases. But ironically, we need to examine further what is the application of this law, impact of it in society, which is material. You see, the source, which is preventing abortion, is objective. Why? Because it causes harm. The second is application of it in the society. So let's examine this. So this is binary. Is it true or is it false? So and now we have to examine the socioeconomic system of the community to derive the answer. So let's see what abortion causes. Abortion causes loss of political influence by minorities. 17 million Black fetuses was aborted since 1974. What is the implication? Implication is they lost economic power. Abortion promoted promiscuity, irresponsibility in the society. Abortion is cause aging Western societies that lack workers to expand their economies. They have to import immigrants to keep their economy functioning. Abortion has enormous negative psychological, emotional, and physical impact on women. Now, obviously, in the Western culture, this thing is legalized. And the reason it was, but we know it causes harm, both to women, to society, to families, to individuals, you name it, it causes harm. But we cannot harm it. So this issue is very interesting, that now we know both sides of the argument are wrong, because most of us are leaning toward one or the other. But ironically, both of them are wrong. Why? And now you have to go back to the source, which is the objective definition of banning abortion. So it is clear it's destructive. But reality is, application of ethics has to pass ethical conditions. What are those ethical conditions? Is justice and equity. So if you do not provide a solution to an objective phenomenon, application of it will fail, regardless of which side of the equation you're in. Now, how can we solve this problem? So if the state is making abortion illegal, then it has the obligation to provide protection, pregnancy care, possible adoption for the child, to be just and equitable. With this state support, the individual does not lose her free will to choose between right or wrong. Now we see that we need to create a different method of applying these instructions to be compliance with the justice and equity. So now we want to examine the society.
Before you go on, can we ask a couple questions?
Sure, good.
So Philip from New York asked a question. Birth control results in some of the negative outcomes you list for abortion. Does that make birth control bad?
Not really. Birth control is necessary in majority of places because of the socioeconomic system. Birth control is a solution actually to the abortion. But this solution only came in maybe since 1960s. It wasn't available before. So remember, the solution that we're proposing, we're talking about continuum of the revelation from 10,000 years ago. But but prevention is the source. And that was an excellent question, because the prevention does not create a human being that you need to abort. So let's look at socioeconomic and in misery index. This is very interesting actually for me, and I wanted to know exactly what happens to societies that violate this universal ethics. It was interesting. Now we found number one miserable index, which is combination of inflation, bank lending rates, unemployment, and gross domestic product. So now we found something very interesting. If you look at the most miserable people on earth, based on this calculation, is Venezuela. And if you look at their inflation rate, it's phenomenally large. Their bank rate is 18%, unemployment is 44%. Their GDP growth is minus 18%. And rate of poverty rate is 87%. 87% of population is poverty. And guess what? They have the largest reserves of oil in the world. So what is causing these people to live miserably where they should have been the richest country? If you look closely, you say relates to totalitarian regime, corruption, fanaticism, disparity between rich and poor. Now, if you look, the second one is Argentina. Now, ironically, these statistics I picked up is the statistics published by the government that are corrupt themselves. So the actual picture is a lot worse than what they admit. So look at Iran. Inflation rate is 35%, bank rate is 22%, unemployment is 17%. If you change the unemployment rate to underemployment rate, in Iran, you're talking about probably 80–90%. That means people have to work 3 jobs to make the ends meet. Their GDP is shrinking by 3%. Again, this is their own numbers. Their poverty rate, what they say their population is below poverty, is 75%. Now you see the consequences of violating the Holy Spirit, violating the efficient cause. Now, if you look at Iran, which is, I believe, the 4th largest exporter of oil, and in the demise that they're in, it relates to the same problems. Expansionism. They want to force their ideas, which is Shiism, to the entire world. And guess what? Latest manifestation said ideology should be spread through words, not through sword. So the new manifestation abolished the old propagation of ideology, and ironically, they're violating it. Now they're paying the price. So there are consequences of violation. So we talk about relativism, which is a disease actually, that or biggest mistake that humanity is following. Look at societies in France or England. They accept that within your house you can discriminate against women, you can have problems, follow Sharia law, but if you come outside, you become a modern man. It's fairly obvious that they're dreaming. You cannot have dual belief. So this issue related to relativism that's propagated last probably half a century is the causes of all the strife and disease of the communities, because they adopted this ideology to their need, because they needed people. Because, again, going back to that reduction of population or aging of population. So what happened was that this infusion of the Holy Spirit during 1800 created doctrines that now we can look at it. Elimination of all kinds of prejudices, equitable distribution of resources, mandatory education, elimination of child labor, freedom of speech, expression, choosing religion thoughts, elimination of extreme wealth and poverty, unification of mankind, language, economic, elimination of our forces, creation of United Tribunal, abolition of use of force to promote ideology, prohibition of lying and false testimony, obligation of governments to provide jobs, promotion of free markets and movement of goods and services, eliminating clergy class, independent investigation of truth, and so on. So there are endorsements and, of course, prohibitions. And these are the key elements that currently those countries that we enumerated, depends on degree of violation of these endorsements or prohibitions, they fall into this trap. And because humanity is a closed system, any actions they do, there will be a reaction. And this is Abdul Baha mentions that any action, there is a preordained reaction, which is very interesting. I thought that this is just philosophical. That means that if you attack a country, eventually people of the world will raise against you and put you down. And this is preordained, as Abdul Baha mentioned, which is very interesting. So if you look at the endorsement, I want to turn this to question and answer, but they're numerous. And these are pages, detachment, equity, test, trustworthiness, moderation. And these are basically elements that needs to be pursued: love of humanity, consultation, and so on, and benevolence, and so on. Then you talk about prohibition. Prohibition from harming animals, discord, seeking absolution from others, prohibition of work on holidays, contending with others, prohibition of wanting oneself over another, so on and so forth. Vengeance, for example. You see, these elements is the objective language of revelation that is given to humanity to implement. Now, if you align yourself personally, family-wise, society-wise, to the objective language of revelation, you're going to live happy. If you're not, you're going to pay the price, both individually, within society as well. So these are the key elements of prohibition. For example, I was wondering why, for example, in Agdas, there is a strict prohibition of eating by hand. Now, why would the manifestation of God would put such a edict in the holy book? The reason is that majority of 1.3 billion Muslims eat by hand. And imagine this coronavirus, if this was practiced, how would spread the virus across the whole universe? Now you see application of the objective language of revelation into daily life. But we have free will, society has free will, And it's up to us to make all these actions happen. There is no invisible hand that is going to make humanity reach the golden age of civilization. It's up to us. Good. Thank you very much. I'm going to basically start question and answer. If people are interested, I'd be glad to respond.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hakim. So there's a question from Mr. Alex Clark from Nebraska. He asked this following question. Hi, Mr. Hakim. You might be familiar with Robert C. Martin, also known as Uncle Bob, a software engineer, instructor, and author. In one of his talks, he proposes an idea that is similar to the Baha'i idea of a universal auxiliary language. He says that the programming world is moving towards having a single general purpose programming language, with some domain-specific languages as needed. Do you think this will happen? And if so, what will it take?
From a programming perspective, you cannot, as he described, you cannot devise a language that covers every portion of reality. It has to be specifically directed to that specific function. And I'm sure new languages would emerge, but there is not going to be a universal language in an objective form. The universal language of objective form only comes through revelation. The language that we use, for example, English, is obviously evolving as well, but it's subjective, it's not objective. You cannot create, as Gödel mentioned, you cannot create a mathematical model or objective language that covers the entire reality. It's not possible.
Okay, so I have another question for you from Ms. Regina Colston. It says, regarding prohibition of harm to animals, how will we resolve imprisoning or harvesting animals for food?
Well, this is the whole point. Right now, again, because we don't have an alternative, the key, this is a paradox, which is rightfully was presented. Abdul-Wahab mentions during the future practices of humanity, the practice of the animal protein would be disappearing, and humanity would move toward basically vegetarian diet. But as you mentioned, the socioeconomic system and availability and cultural education of humanity cannot practice it the same way that they couldn't practice equality of man and woman during Muhammad's time. It was not possible. Now we see, even today, majority of the humanity doesn't truly practice equality of man and woman, although it's an objective model. Application of it requires time and education.
Yes, and actually there's a quote from Abdul-Baha specifically on the subject stating that eating animals is for the beasts of the field to eat animals, and that eventually humanity will move away entirely from the consumption of meat. That right. Meat is, right now we're eating it, and if we need to, we should have it, but it's not for humanity to continue doing.
Actually, one of the major causes of ozone depletion is methane from domesticated animal for food consumption.
And it's intriguing, we focused primarily on a mode of transportation when in reality it's our eating habit that causes the most impact, because we burn down forests for the clearing of land just to grow animals and so much along that line. But there is another question that was posed. The question is this from Ms. Regina Colston. When we ascend to the next world and the spirit is made manifest, does this mean we have the reality of existence within a soul in another dimension?
Yes, this the worlds of the way Baha'u'llah described is you have different worlds, and one is obviously world of physical reality, which is world of duration and time, and then you have the spiritual world where your spirit is, and there are other worlds. The Arabic words lahut, hahut, there are many, nasut, which is the physical reality, and so on. So there are description of those already. We can have a different time to describe those, but in reality, your spirit detaches itself from the body, because the spirit is emanates from God, the soul, at the time of conception. That means it's not inside the body, it's attached to the body. When you pass on to the other world, the spirit gets free, and you carry all the experiences, love, even capacities that you didn't develop would carry with yourself. The difference is that in the other world, there is no veil. That means that everybody can see who you are, and you can see where everybody is. So spiritually, you would see different progression of different souls in the other dimension, because there is no material in the other world. So if you have jealousy, revenge, basically bad habits in this world, guess what? You're gonna have it in the other world. The difference is that you cannot cause harm to anybody else, because those elements have impact in the physical reality, but not in spiritual reality. So believe it or not, you're stuck with yourself. You better correct yourself here, because for eternity, you're gonna carry those diseases. Although in the other world, through supplication and your own effort, you can correct your deficiencies. The same way that a child can be born into the world without limbs or eyes, you can be born, your spirit, in the other worlds with those deficiencies that you have to correct. But humanity, God is all merciful and doesn't have any bottomless pit with fire. It's just the closeness to spirit, to God, is the joy that we experience, and purity that we have exercised in this world, learned about it, that we carry to the other world.
So there's a question that I actually have regarding intercession and the act of coming in on behalf of someone else to assist them, be it in the mode of this world or the next, specifically if someone is in trouble, helping them to get out of that trouble, that act of intercession. Can you, if you could, explain in regards to describing reality as we have just described today, the tools? How would you describe that to somebody who's interested, for example, their parents who have passed on, who are in the next world and who they'll be joining eventually? How would you explain that to somebody who isn't very familiar with this subject?
Sure. First, we need to define actually this title that we give to ourselves of complying with certain religion or adhering to a certain religion has no meaning. The reality is that by becoming a Christian and believing Jesus, you don't get saved. By your action complying with doctrine of Christianity, you get saved, not by calling yourself or adhering to it. So sizing your effort in terms of aligning yourself with the latest revelation or ethical doctrine is the measure of success and measure of adherence that is acceptable to God, not which religion or which sect you belong to or who do you follow. So this is really critical from that perspective. Now, we know that there is no invisible hand of God that comes and rearranges, and you're trying to basically avoid an accident, and suddenly the light that was red turns green because you forgot and you're passing the red light. Nothing like that happens. In reality, what happens, the influence of the Holy Spirit and this communication, first of all, complying with the Holy Spirit makes you under the umbrella of the protection of the Holy Spirit. That means that you would be exposed to less trials and tribulation if you follow that. So that's one item that needs to be understood generally. But what happens is when you're, first of all, we need to know who can intervene. Obviously, holy souls, prior manifestation, God himself, and through infusing energy, this spiritual energy through visions, dreams, and so on to people that suddenly they think that they need to go someplace or they need to help somebody. Although the person that is afflicted with that malady may not know it, but other people, that we're all linked spiritually. So the dimension of spiritual is all connected. The same way that we were in the third dimension looking at individual in two dimensions, and we could see everything everybody did. When you go into the spiritual world, you can actually see all the interaction, all the problems of this world. So some people think that they have guardian angels, for example, in the other world. In reality is that those are the holy souls that can infuse visions into people to come to your help. So the mechanism is through that vision or wahy, they call it in Arabic, that comes to people, and they seem to move toward solving a problem. But it has a psychological effect. They had examined actually when you do prayers, your immune system boosts dramatically. And they don't exactly know what the relationship is, or group of people praying for well-being of another person that they don't even know. So they haven't really discovered how this functions occurs. But the application of it, measurement of it is objective. You can actually see psychologically your immune systems through this belief or spirit of faith that one person has would make their immune system more robust to defend itself. So is there implication of this spiritual interaction with the physical world? So you can actually interfere or provide for your parents' progressive improvement in the other world through charity, donation, and prayers for them. So these are the key elements that we can basically follow. I hope I answered it. So Holy Soul manifestation, even prior manifestations of God have that power. So praying to Jesus, for example, or Muhammad for that matter, or Buddha or Krishna, has the same ability to intercede in front of God to relieve the malady or situation that the person is in.
So another question in regards to the Holy Spirit, since we mentioned that the application of the Holy Spirit towards having a life that is materially more stable, having a life that is full of fulfillment and potentially more happiness. Could you explain, as you had already touched on the subject of the Holy Spirit several times and how it affects societies, how on an individual level employing this will assist greatly? I remember you'd mentioned about the prohibition of alcohol being an example. Could you elaborate on that subject?
Sure. Well, let's look at it, for example, as a alcohol. They tried this, or drugs of abuse. They tried to prohibit it in the United States, and they found out that it causes more harm than good because humanity or population is not educated in the consumption of alcohol and the ills of it. When you're looking at, for example, alcohol consumption, you have about 19 million alcoholics in the United States. Now, imagine that these alcoholics, which they have episode of falling into different types of behavioral pattern that is harmful to themselves and their family members. So if you assume 4 people get impacted by their behavior, you're imagining that almost 100 million people, 1/3 of population of the United States, is in pain every day because we accepted that we cannot solve this problem of alcoholism. Now, reality is that alcohol causes about 40,000 deaths every year. 300,000 people get maimed and out of work circle every year. That means that we have 4 Vietnam wars every year, 4 Vietnam wars. The entire decades of conflict in Vietnam caused 10,000 deaths. You have 4 Vietnam deaths in United States every year, and nobody cares. Nobody accepts the consequences. Imagine how much incest, how much rape is occurring in society because of alcohol. So the reality is, again, going back to objective form of prohibition of alcohol, which was an objective Holy Spirit doctrine, we gave up on fixing it. So the key really is that each individual has to be able to understand giving up a personal right of consuming alcohol to the right of the society not to get harmed. But what do? We allow the individual freedom of consuming alcohol, but if they cause harm, we put them in jail. It's like applying the law of an eye for an eye. And after a few decades, half of the population would be blind. And this is the path that we have chosen today in the Western culture to follow, which is false. And we're in pain for it because we're violating the Holy Spirit. So these are the consequences where you heard of the frog and the boiling water. If you put the frog into water and slowly heat the pot, the actually frog would enjoy it to a degree that he would never jump out, and the frog is going to get cooked. And that's where the stage we're in right now. But if you drop the frog into boiling water, it jumps out immediately. And this is what's happening in the society today. And the old world order is crumbling slowly, little by little. And the only solution is the application of the objective language of the revelation that prevents harm to occur.
So to be clear about the frog example, when you put the frog in the water as it slowly warms, by the time the frog would jump out, it's too late because it's dying, right?
No, it will never jump out actually, because it gets used to it until he's cooked.
Okay, so the question,
In the boiling water, it jumps out immediately.
yeah, because it has the stimulus, the extreme, versus the one that slowly creeps in. So there's room, I think, for one more question, and that question is around how this relates to global governance. The concept of describing a reality, the concept of using objective tools to analyze it, and uniting a diverse people around the whole entire globe that currently has conflicting theories, conflicting desires with those theories, and ultimately no common system as of now. What is your response given the subject of the talk, given the considering the material that you've presented? How would you apply this as a solution to uniting the world?
Well, exactly. What happens is this, that slowly people find out that spending 30% of the national budget on defense doesn't make sense if there's not going to be any wars. And what happens is that the demand of the society for better condition and living and demands application of ethics forces humanity to move toward one common economic system, which we are moving toward that anyways. Not because humanity likes it, it's because there is no alternative, there is no choice. So this issue regarding unification of mankind will occur, whether we like it or not. The difference is whether we're going to use revelation, that the source of the improvement in material civilization, or we do it by trial and error. And Baha'u'llah, during his ministry, wrote letters to all the emperors and kings of the world and warned them that unless you give up your armament and war machine, you're gonna engulf yourself in massive wars that would decimate your economies, your people, and it creates harm in the society. And guess what happened? Out of that model after the First World War, League of Nations by Woodrow Wilson was implemented to reconcile differences of humanity. Guess what? His daughter was with Baha'is in items came from Baha'i religion. And guess what? They did the doctrine of Holy Spirit or recommendation of the new manifestation, and they fell into Second World War. And guess what happened? The League of Nations turned into United Nations. So they included everybody that had anything to say, trying to reconcile differences. So as you see the gradual movement to what promoted or foretold of the golden age of civilization, we're going there. It's up to us whether we're going to go there trying everything or follow the Holy Spirit that allows humanity to live happily to get to that point. So when you agree to have one common economic system, one common reconciliation platform, one world legal system, free movement of goods and services, acknowledge right of humans regardless of where they are, all these elements only would materialize when movement toward the new world order is facilitated and applied by humans themselves. There is no force outside humanity that would bring us to that point. And it's doable. It's question of, and as Abdul Wahab mentioned, is preordained. It's going to get there. Now, you can get there with losing your arms and limbs, or you can get there in one piece. And that's really up to humanity, whether they want to follow the Holy Spirit or not.
Thank you, Mr. Hakim, so much for joining us for this good hour and a half. And everybody, if you have questions, please go to clearwaterbahais.org/contact. There you can insert your contact information and ask your question, and we can get back to you. Further, if you already have access to the Facebook, please go to facebook.com and go onto our page. I'm going to pull that up for you so you can get there directly and you'll know you're there. It's a very simple one, facebook.com/Clearwater Baha'i Center. So you have two places to go to that are definitely available. It is clearwaterbahais.org/contact. If not that one, number two, facebook.com/Clearwater Baha'i Center. So thank you so much for joining Mr. Hakim with this beautiful talk. If you have further questions, Mr. Hakim is more than happy to respond. The question was asked as to the PowerPoint. Mr. Hakim will be sharing the PowerPoint with everybody to download. We will be placing that hopefully upon the website, clearwaterbahais.org. It will be under the Online Baha'i Adult Learning tab, somewhere in that area. And with that being said, Mr. Hakim, I leave this for you to conclude.
Thank you very much for everyone's, and hopefully we see you. We have more people that are going to do presentation. Please join us, and we all would learn from each other of how to apply this grace of God given Holy Spirit in and living in an age that our destiny is in our own hand, and we can make it happen. Thank you again.